Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people here bright and early this morning. A warm welcome to this session, which is co-hosted by Roche and Global AMR R&D Hub. I'm Shuli Ghosh. I'm delighted to be moderating this session for you on tackling the global crisis of antimicrobial resistance. AMR, of course, has been called the silent pandemic, one of the biggest threats to modern medicine. And without action, it could return us to an era where infections that are very treatable today could become deadly tomorrow. AMR also carries significant risks for vulnerable patients with non-communicable diseases such as cancer. And the crisis is being felt most acutely in low and middle income countries where the risk of antibiotic-resistant infections is being made worse through a lack of access and availability of medicines. So, in the search for solutions, it's now clear that the world urgently needs novel and innovative antibiotics to not only safeguard the advance of medicine, but also to reduce the pressure on established antibiotics. The need was formally acknowledged by the political declaration adopted at the UN General Assembly last month. In a pivotal move, world leaders pledged to radically scale up efforts to combat AMR, and their commitment includes boosting research and development. The declaration calls for incentives and financing mechanisms to support drug development, stronger public-private partnerships to drive innovation, and crucial measures to address the growing shortage of researchers in the field of antibiotic R&D. So, of course, the question is, how do those words get translated into action? And that is the focus of today's session. And I'm delighted to say we have an excellent panel of speakers who I'm very excited to introduce to you in just a moment, who are come to us from across all sectors, who are going to help us explore real-world solutions, discuss what's needed to accelerate the discovery and supply of groundbreaking new drugs, which could turn the tide on AMR, and they will also be taking questions from the audience. So we very much look forward to hearing your questions, your observations on this critical issue. We are also going to get a country perspective from Saudi Arabia. We're delighted to have with us Dr. Abdullah Al-Ghazani, the CEO of the Public Health Authority. Welcome to you, sir, and we look forward to hearing your comments a little later on. But first, I want to introduce one of the co-hosts of this session for a few opening remarks. Please welcome Dr. Leslie Ogilvie, Director of the Secretariat at the Global AMR R&D Hub. Leslie, thanks very much indeed for, breaking it already, for helping us to kick off this session. You know that won't be the first time I do that, right? It'll happen several times. So your organisation, a global partnership to address AMR through research and collaboration, set up in 2018, what do you think have been the most significant developments and changes since then?
Thank you, Shirley. It's really a pleasure to be here. Just want to say thank you very much to Roche, first of all, for this co-hosting this panel session with us. It's been a pleasure to collaborate with you on this. So 2018, time flies, so it's been a while. It's gone quick but slow, in a sense, and there's been a number of few key developments with a very positive momentum since then. I think the first one to mention is changes in the global governance for AMR. We've had the setup of the Global Leaders Group on AMR in 2020, the establishment of the multi-stakeholder partnership platform in 2022, and now with the political declaration, we now have the mandate to actually establish an independent science panel. And I think these are the three structures that the IACG in 2019 recommended that would be set up so we can actually have a stronger global governance and accountability in AMR. So we're getting there. We've got two of the structures set up and one in process. So the second thing I think we've seen real progress in is data and evidence. We've got much more data and evidence on the economic, the social and the medical burden of AMR since 2018. The Graham study is such a great example of that was published in The Lancet, showing that the burden is global, but of course the disproportionate burden falls on the poorest and the most vulnerable populations. I think also the Lancet series on AMR that was published in May now, a few months ago, is also providing that overview, but also the forward-looking aspect and what we can do to solve the problem. And I think that's very important to have that there. So I would be remiss if I didn't actually mention the hub and the data and evidence that we are providing in the area. So we have our dynamic dashboard, and this is the most comprehensive repository of information on what's actually being invested in AMR R&D since 2017 from the public and philanthropic sector. And this provides that data baseline where decision makers and funders can actually say, okay, what's actually happening in this space and where can I allocate what we know are very, very limited resources and funds. So I think that I've got 4 points. So the third one is about public-private partnerships. We're seeing a lot of support, continuing support for public-private partnerships like CARB-X and GARD-P, and I hope some of those guys are in the room today. And also the establishment of the AMR Action Fund, $1 billion US dollars to generate 2 to 4 new antibiotics by 2030. I mean, this is groundbreaking. If this all coalesces together, we could really start to see a very strong pipeline. But we know from WHO, thanks to their reports, that the pipelines for new antibacterials are still very insufficient and thin, so we need to be working on this. Okay, fourth point, last point. I think it's really exciting that we're seeing lots of countries and lots of governments actually starting to explore, implement and pilot then implement different innovative financing models for new antimicrobials addressing the most critical public health needs. And these are models that de-link revenues from the actual volume sold. And we also have the potential to actually stimulate R&D with those, make sure we get access to the drugs that we need, and also make sure that we have this, they're used prudently. So overall, we're seeing a lot of really nice key movements forward, very positive, but I think we need to be doing more. We need to be doing it better, and we need to be doing it faster.
So it's very encouraging to see the momentum, and that momentum was continued by the UN at the General Assembly last month, the political declaration. You were there. You called it a pivotal moment. What are your thoughts on what they've said, particularly about research and development and boosting innovation?
Yeah, so maybe first thing to say is we do have this overarching target, 10% reduction in mortality by 2030. And I think this is a target that countries and stakeholders can coalesce around to drive action. And I think that's really important, you know, to have that there as the overarching target that we're heading for. We have the independent panel, the mandate for that to be established, and I think, you know, akin to the IPCC for climate change. And I think this could be a very pivotal moment to actually drive the commitments actually into action. In terms of innovation, yeah, there's no targets, but we have strong language. They do say we're going to boost R&D in antimicrobials, vaccines, and diagnostics, recognizing the power of public-private partnerships, recognizing the important role that the private sector play, and also a really strong emphasis on access. You know, if we're going to have these fruits of innovation and R&D, we need to make sure that everybody can share in those rewards. And I'm going to stop there.
Brilliant. Leslie, thank you very much indeed. Yes, please give her a round of applause. And thank you to my panellists for waiting so patiently. Let me please introduce them to you, the many familiar faces to you, I'm sure. On my immediate left, Dr. Michael Lobritz, Global Head, Infectious Diseases Therapeutic Area at Roche Pharma Research and Early Development, based in Switzerland, and formerly an infectious diseases physician. Dr. Elmar Nimisken, Policy Officer, Health Research at the European Commission's Directorate General Research and Innovation in Brussels, which is the department responsible for EU policy on research, science and innovation. Professor Dr. Sabia Esak, the South African Research Chair in Antibiotic Resistance and One Health, Professor in Pharmaceutical Sciences at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and co-leader of the Multi-Stakeholder Partnership Platform Action Group on Stewardship across the antimicrobial life cycle. Dr. Carey Adams, CEO of the Union for International Cancer Control, also based in Switzerland. The UICC, of course, works to unite and support the cancer community to reduce the global cancer burden. And Dr. Marlin Grapp, Ambassador on Antimicrobial Resistance at Sweden's Ministry of Health and Social Affairs, Sweden's first AMR ambassador. She represents the country in the EU and WHO. Speakers, thank you very much indeed for joining this really important discussion. I'm going to spend a little time with each of you looking firstly at innovation in AMR and how it can contribute to society, to the economy, etc. And Michael, I'm going to start with you. Leslie mentioned it. She said there have barely been any new antibiotics in the past few years. I think the WHO says only 13 new antibiotics authorised since 2017. Why on earth is it so slow? What are the scientific barriers?
Thank you, Shuli, for the question. Thank you to the organizers of the World Health Summit for this forum. And thank you to my fellow panelists for your insights into this challenging problem. So I would like to start off with what I believe to be an uncontroversial proposal, that the creation of innovative antibiotics is one of the essential components necessary to fully address the global AMR crisis, both today and in the future. So a bit of context for my response. So Roche is a leading biopharmaceutical and diagnostics company based in Switzerland. At Roche, we have been engaged in original applied research and development in the antibiotic space. If I think about the context of the last 10 years of our effort, from our discovery portfolio, from the laboratory, Roche has brought 2 novel chemical class antibiotic candidates that target WHO priority pathogens into human clinical testing. And it's from this experience that I speak. The most important message that I have is this. The route from laboratory to clinical trials to useful medicine is neither direct nor predictable. And innovation in antibiotics presents unique scientific challenges, which I'll highlight 2. The first one that I would say is to describe that the concept that the low-hanging fruit has been harvested. So for many high-priority pathogens, there's not been a new class of antibiotics in over 50 years. Why not? There are multiple barriers to the successful completion of this goal. I'll highlight 1, fundamental aspects of the biological and chemical properties of bacteria. They have complex outer layers. They're bacterial membranes. They prevent chemicals from getting inside to penetrate and reach drug targets. We simply don't understand the chemical properties of this membrane enough to quickly and simply identify new chemical matter with potential to become antibiotics. The second piece I would highlight is what I call the persistence of resistance. There's an important distinction when we think about antibiotics versus many other types of medicines that we developed, in that antibiotics are not permanent solutions. New medicines are necessary constantly because the evolutionary pressure applied by antibiotics, which are killing bacteria, are so tremendous that given time, resistance to new agents will always emerge. When you consider this combination of factors, that a new antibiotic can take upwards of 10 years of R&D to deliver one, plus that ever-present need for innovation, it's self-evident that a sustained commitment of resources to the problem of AMR is essential.
So an R&D system, in your opinion, how do you make a robust and effective and sustainable R&D system then?
That's very important. So I'd start with patients first in this context. So sustainable delivery of new medicines must consider unmet need in individuals and healthcare systems. So here I would like to actually highlight diagnostic testing as a cornerstone of this. So it's crucial to identify those patients who have bacterial infections versus those that have mimics of bacterial infections, to say who needs antibiotics and who doesn't. Equally, within those patients who have bacterial infections, it's critical to identify those who can be treated with the current arsenal of antibiotics versus those who would benefit from novel innovations, those that can treat drug-resistant infections. And the diagnosis needs to happen quickly. To treat patients effectively, caregivers need to provide the right medicine at the right time to the right patient. So without effective diagnostics, we will not use new and existing antibiotics optimally. The second piece that I would build upon is the centrality of collaboration in this overall effort. So drug development, we like to talk about it as being the world's most complicated team sport. It is an intensive multidisciplinary effort that requires enthusiastic contribution from a diverse range of experts, both within a company and across the entirety of the ecosystem. So these problems are simply too hard for individual actors working in isolation to be successful.
So can I just ask you a question on that? Because you are a part of a shrinking community, okay, growing shortage of researchers globally in many fields of medicine. and especially in antibiotics R&D. What are your thoughts on that?
I've never thought about it as being a shrinking community specifically, so thank you for that. I have worked.
A very important community, but there are fewer of you. There is a shortage.
No, I've worked extensively in organizations that value training of the next generation of physicians and scientists as part of their core duty. It's now very well documented that infectious diseases in general, and AMR particularly, has struggled to attract and to retain scientific and medical talent. There are exceptional researchers who are migrating to other fields where jobs and funding are simply more available. This phenomenon cuts across sectors. So this is academic, this is medical, this is biopharmaceutical R&D. Without a vibrant body of researchers across sectors, the inventions that humanity needs and will need in the future will not be made. And I want to emphasize the use of that term, invention. And why is that important? And I want to consider the story of the discovery of penicillin in this context. So this is one of the most tremendous stories in medical history, and everyone knows it in some way, shape, or form, right? That Alexander Fleming leaves Petri dishes inoculated with bacteria at an open window. He goes off on vacation, on holiday. While he's gone, a fungus alights into the space, lands on the dish serendipitously, and when he returns, a halo appears on the dishes that signifies the death of bacteria around that mold, and signifying the identification of the world's first magic bullet. It is an incredible story of discovery. What's missing for me is the story of what it takes to bring new medicines to patients. It doesn't relate the vast contributions from so many experts, the unsung heroes that are necessary to achieve a useful medicine. I would argue that the world's next essential medicines are not likely to be discovered by their serendipitous arrival while scientists are out of the laboratory. Instead, we will be successful through a consistent and determined application of effort. To achieve this, researchers need to be supported and their inventions need to be valued. I believe policies that support this type of sustained innovation will be decisive for our objective to reduce global burden of AMR morbidity and mortality.
Michael, thank you. And I know that that is something we're going to be exploring in a little bit more detail, and we'd love to hear what you guys think of it as well. For the moment, thank you. Elmar, let me come to you. So just building a little bit on what Michael has said regarding the scientific and medical barriers, clearly there are some challenges in place in coming up with new and novel and innovative antibiotics. How is Europe addressing those challenges?
Yeah, thank you for having me here, and thanks for the question. So, as Michael already said, collaboration is essential, and we also need to remember that at the European level, we invest only a small share of R&D funding in Europe. So, our main tool for supporting research and innovation in the early phases of to fight antimicrobial resistance is our different partnerships with the EU member states and actually a little bit beyond. And so the current iteration will be the One Health AMR European Partnership. From the European Commission side, we are ready to invest up to 100 million euros, provided that the matching contributions from the countries and other partners come. We actually had a deadline and a proposal has been submitted, so let's hope it goes through the evaluation. And so then as of next year, we should really be starting this fairly sizable partnership that actually even reaches out to other partners. Carbex might actually become involved as well to then take on the things that are on the more earlier phases from what we fund. Now, beyond this partnership, which clearly is our main tool for investing, we also have topics, not so many, but on occasion we have. And there we certainly look at what we can to support particular issues in antimicrobial resistance. And I'm told that we should have actually a big topic also coming up for the next work program 2025. Then these are what we call the programmed part of our funding, but we also have bottom-up funding. Many of you may have heard of the European Research Council, where excellent science is supported at different levels of careers, from early-stage career scientists to quite experienced scientists. And there, indeed, anybody can apply, and that includes, of course, researchers that address AMR. Another part of our bottom-up program is on the innovation side, and that is called the European Innovation Council, where European companies and even single companies can apply and get support for their efforts. And again, since this is open, companies that are active in the space addressing AMR on the diagnostic, on, it doesn't have to be research on a new antibiotic, can be supported. And then we have partnered already a long time ago. We felt that we need to partner with, to really get into the more investment type of support. And there the player there is the European Investment Bank in Luxembourg, which typically finances, big infrastructure projects, or some big pharma companies actually have, get credits, loans from the EIB. Now, in this very challenging space of investment in infectious diseases, that typically these things are not bankable, as our colleagues call it. So we provided, through the infectious disease finance facility, kind of a security part to support this financing. And that has actually led to about a good handful of investments in this kind of space. Okay. And in addition, our colleagues from what is now the Health Emergency and Response Authority, Preparedness and Response Authority, they kind of emulate that, and they are starting the HERA Invest program, which again is the same tool. They give money to the EIB, which allows the EIB to make investments in the space, which is related to pandemic preparedness, and that particularly also includes AMR.
Great to hear the momentum that's happening across Europe. Can I ask you about a global context then? What is being done to tackle AMR in developing countries?
Well, we have the partnership for now more than 20 years, the European Developing Countries Clinical Trials Partnership. As its name implies, is really focused on taking interventions of all sorts through the clinical testing and into application. So a lot of implementation research is being funded. And in its latest iteration, which was launched in 2022, we specifically include antimicrobial resistance, and we did manage to include a topic on AMR, and so where the grants are currently being prepared, but quite a bit of investment for this collaboration between the EU and Sub-Saharan Africa, but really led by the needs and the science and the doctors in Sub-Saharan Africa is being taken forward. So that's really our main tool. And of course, I should mention, it's perhaps not so considered, but certainly we have contributed to fighting drug-resistant tuberculosis, and we have done a lot of investment through EDCTP on malaria, where we have obviously some resistance issues as well, which are not addressed with classical antibiotics, but still we need to constantly, very much like Michael said, we need to constantly update the treatment regimes because of the ecological pressure that we are exerting with our treatments, and then the good artemisinin-based treatments don't work so well anymore. So there is this need. It goes a little bit beyond antibiotics, more proximally, but the scientific challenges are always the same basis.
Elmar, thank you. And that's a great jumping off point to come to you, Sabia. In a developing world context, what does innovation look like?
Thank you, Shirley. So let me start with the lived experience, describing the lived experience of people in low and middle income countries, so you can appreciate what innovation should look like in LMICs. So picture this. Tom lives in a slum in a low income country. His dwelling is constructed of mismatched pieces of timber and corrugated iron that lets the weather in. It houses himself, his wife, 4 children under 5, and his parents. 3 of his 4 walls are almost flush with those of his neighbors, and his front door is 50 meters from a stream that serves as a source for domestic water. It serves as a playing ground for his children who swim in it, and it also serves as the toilet. The surface water is downstream from an inefficient wastewater treatment plant that receives water from several hospitals in the area. The hospitals experience high patient loads. This stockouts of essential medicines is very, very common, including those of antimicrobials. And this requires out-of-pocket expenses and also reliance on the informal market that is rife with substandard and falsified medication. Infections, including multi-drug resistant infections, are common and spread very easily in this situation of high population density, poor socioeconomic indicators of health and wellness, inadequate water sanitation and hygiene, and a fragile healthcare system. This is the lived experience of some 1.1 billion people around the world, and ever increasing as we think about the displaced populations as a result of war and conflict. So what does or what should innovation look like in these situations? And I'm going to speak to preventives, therapeutics, and diagnostics. So let's begin with prevention. This requires innovation in WASH and, of course, in vaccines. Many of us in this room are aware of the Global Sewage Project that looks at sewage from over 100 countries and looks at the antimicrobial resistance genes as a unit of analysis. And we found that the diversity and abundance is greatest in low and middle income countries, and that the better the WASH facilities, the less the diversity and the abundance. So we do need to think about innovations in WASH. And we in South Africa are looking at non-sewage sanitation systems as one of such innovation, and we can talk about that more. Hot off the press from the WHO is the vaccines report that came out on Friday, I think, and that speaks about estimating the impact of vaccines in reducing AMR and AMU, and I've got a couple of numbers here for you. In a nutshell, deploying some 44 vaccines against 24 pathogens could prevent 500,000 deaths, reduce costs as a result of healthcare costs as well as productivity losses by billions, and reduce the use of antibiotics by some 2.5 billion doses. And if we reduce the use of antimicrobials, we then reduce the selection pressure and therefore the emergence of resistance. Then if we look at therapeutics, we are well aware that resistance exists to every single antimicrobial antibiotic that is available currently for therapeutic use, whether in humans or in animals. Even the latest cephalosporin, cefiderocol, which has a relatively unique mechanism of action through siderophores, already has resistance against it. So never has there been a greater need, as everybody has said, in that regard. But in this, they must be products, they must be target product profiles that target the burden in LMICs. And I'd like to commend the latest BPPL, the bacterial priority pathogen list, which then includes, for example, fluoroquinolone-resistant Salmonella typhi and Shigella, as well as macrolide-resistant strep, and ampicillin-resistant Haemophilus influenza, which are really more prominent in low and middle-income countries. And my last point, in terms of the diagnostics aspect, once these are discovered, we need to ensure that the diagnostics they are used appropriately by using the appropriate diagnostics. And these diagnostics range from simple microbial culture and sensitivity testing to the point-of-care testing and the rapid diagnostics that will confirm the indication of, for the use of an antimicrobial, so it's a bacterial infection, and allow us to determine which is the lowest spectrum antibiotic to use to cure the infection, but also then prevent the emergence of resistance. So again, we need diagnostics that have utility in NMICs, and then a shout out to Carbex, who on its latest call includes diagnostics for neonatal sepsis, as well as a proof of concept for novel types of diagnostics for lower respiratory tract infections.
You paint a very evocative picture of the reality on the ground in low and middle income countries. So talking about the need for new medicines, new vaccines, diagnostics, therapeutics, how then do you get that translated into health systems and clinical use in low income settings where resources are limited?
So again, let me paint a real life picture this time. One of the international organizations donated ceftriaxone to Malawi to treat drug-resistant gonorrhea in the main. But when this was made available, it was used at all levels, from primary healthcare through to tertiary healthcare. It was used indiscriminately, such that the ESBL producing Enterobacterales, or the third generation cephalosporin resistant bugs, rose from about 10 to 15% to more than 51%. And we showed this in a small study we did on UTIs in the community. And if people will remember the 10-year trend analysis in the Lancet on bloodstream infections. And if you annotate when ceftriaxone was introduced, you can almost see that immediately after that there was an increase in both the E. coli as well as Klebsiella that were third-generation cephalosporin resistant. So this was very well-intentioned donation, but this is an example of access gone awry. And this is because we had a weak healthcare system, and at that time, stewardship had not taken off very well in all of the in the hospitals. So access and stewardship are two sides of the same coin, and there must be equitable access must be accompanied by diagnostics, etc. But we know that laboratory capacity in low and middle income countries is really well, it requires strengthening. If we look at the MAP study that has been funded by the Fleming Fund, we saw that less than 1.3% of laboratories actually did bacteriological testing. More than 80% had conducted less than 1,000 simple AST tests. And only a third of the pathogens on the old BPPL were actually being tested. So we need to strengthen lab capacity for diagnostics and to ensure that any kind of access is associated with stewardship.
Sabir, thank you. I'll come back to you and talk to you in a little bit about new antibiotics for LMICs, but I want to move into to Carey now, because we've talked a lot about infections. I think most people are aware of the issues of AMR in infectious conditions, but it is also a massive, massive issue for people with non-communicable diseases. What's the picture for cancer patients?
Yeah, just to provide some context, so the UICC is a non-government organisation based in Geneva, and we have about 1,150 cancer organisation members in 170 countries. We're all affected by cancer. If I asked you all now, do you know someone who's had cancer in your family, friends or colleagues, everyone will put their hand up. But not many people understand that infections are the second highest killer of cancer patients. They develop infections because they're more exposed to their immunity is reduced. They go through immunotherapy, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and also surgery. And that's if you're in a high-income country, to be fair. Not all of that is available in low and middle-income countries. So they're more exposed. 1 in 5 cancer patients have to be hospitalized because of an infection. A couple of years ago, we became aware of this potential issue in the longer term when our board was looking at what's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years that could affect cancer patients. And AMR came onto the desk as an issue that we should definitely get involved with, because it was clear as at today it's a problem, but what would it be like in the future? Now, the average cancer patient is twice as likely to develop an infection that cannot be treated. And notice I've used those words, an infection that cannot be treated, which is AMR. Because what we found talking to the cancer community, that AMR as itself is quite a complicated concept to understand, but they certainly understand an infection that cannot be treated and could lead to death is something that they do understand, because a cancer patient through their journey is facing death all the way through that journey and hopefully does not die, actually recovers from their cancer. So it's an issue that's around today. It's more prevalent within cancer patients than non-cancer patients. And if you look forward in the future and you take the AMR forecasts and projections, then the likelihood of you dying from an infection that cannot be treated when you are going through your cancer treatment is going to grow and grow and grow. And as we heard earlier, it takes a lot of funding for Roche and others to invest in an antibiotic. But also there's a lot of money that goes into a new cancer medicine. Billions go into cancer medicines every year. And our forecast is if we do not address the AMR issue over time, then actually the advances we make in the treatment for a cancer will be offset, if not eliminated, by our inability to address infections in the future. So that's why it's really important to our community. That's why UICC and its members have become more aware of the situation, and that's why we were at the UN high-level meeting a couple of weeks ago in order to make sure that the cancer voice was heard, to make it real, as you described earlier, make it real from a patient perspective rather than the theoretical perspective. So it's very important to
So the cancer community are actively on board with the need for research and innovation. What do they want to see happen?
But I think there's a couple of things that we'd like to see happen. First of all, following up on the commitments at the AMR high-level meeting, we think is absolutely critical. And that means international collaboration. It's not just a country by country, company by company issue. And I thought your presentation at the beginning was excellent. The fact we're putting in the global governance structure in place to actually encourage collaboration internationally, I think is very important, because we've seen that happen on NCDs, where we've got a great global action plan, and we're working towards that with best buy recommendations and an essential medicines list that is deployed around the world. So we know that international collaboration can make a difference. I'm also pleased to hear about investment in such organisations like CARB-X and also GARP. We need to invest in those particular organisations because they can help bring through the pipeline in future. And we need companies like Roche to see that a product, which at the end of the day you don't really want to sell, is actually the right thing to invest in. Now, that's a bit of a challenge with the investment community, but it's right for society. So there needs to be the right balance, and I think some companies get it and some companies don't. So that's at the international side. On national action, we really do want to see countries have a national AMR plan. Without any doubt, they should all have one. Because every country is different. We know that because over the last 15 years, we've been pushing for national cancer control plans. And we've seen them increase from 65% coverage to over 85%. Now, what happens when a country says it wants to address cancer, it then starts identifying what the problem is locally, and it starts putting in policies to address the risk factors, screening, early detection, treatment, and care, and also supportive care, the complete continuum of cancer control. Within that, there needs to be addressing the issue of infection control and infection treatment and care. So at a national level, we need to marry those AMR plans up with the national cancer control plans, and no doubt with other NCD plans, if they exist, in order to have a cohesive approach to saving people from dying from an infection when, unfortunately, they have an NCD.
Just a very quick word, Kerry, about the role of civil society. UICC is a very strong and powerful advocacy group. Should civil society be really banging on the doors of government and policymakers and saying, we need this now?
Yeah, I've given the reasons why it is a civil society issue, because civil society, sometimes of that word, I thought the thing it gets lost, like there's sort of people who run around with placards and, they chain themselves to fences and we want things. The truth is that we represent the people like you who have had cancer or may have cancer in the future. All right, we represent your voice to make sure that governments, the WHO, the EU, listen to the voice of people affected by these diseases. So it's important that we have a role, because we can reach into our communities and we get those stories, exactly the same stories that you have. The story of a young girl who's been diagnosed with cancer, she's going through her treatment, it's all going really well, their mother and father are there, they get a phone call from the hospital saying, got a bit of a temperature, they go in, they talk to the daughter, she seems to be okay, and then 48 hours she's dead from an infection. Okay, those stories are real and they're happening today. So we represent that. So there's a few things that we do. First of all, raising awareness about AMR in a language that can be understood by our patient community. Understanding that AMR isn't another part of the hospital department over there. Oncology is here and infections are over there. It's actually all together, so that people understand that when they go in to be treated for cancer, they're also being treated to avoid infections, and they're likely to be treated for an infection. And hopefully there'll be a pipeline of new medicines coming along. If that is a complicated infection, it still can be treated. Second thing that we can do is to advocate for those policy changes at a national level. So as I said, making sure that through our connections and networks with government health ministers around the world to say, look, we are as interested in AMR as we are in the cancer challenge. All right, they are together. So we want them to be engaged in the AMR plan and the National Cancer Control Plan. And the other thing is that we can work with private sector and work with other governments to see how we can improve the flow and use of medicines around the world. 70% of cancer deaths occurred in low middle-income countries. 70% of the growth in cancer patients in the next 10, 20 years will be in low middle-income countries. Countries which do not have the essential medicines for cancer or for infections, probably. I imagine, I haven't looked at the data. And they also don't have radiotherapy. and they probably don't have the surgery. So we need to work at improving the availability of medicines in those countries for cancer and all the associated issues you have with cancer patients, whether that be infections or whether that be in palliative care and the availability of opioids. It's a complete package.
Kerry, thank you. And can I say, as a journalist, if you were to chain yourself to a tree, I could get those pictures on TV. So do think about that.
I've done it before.
Malin, let me come to you. AMR, obviously a key priority for Sweden. I know Sweden has worked to strengthen the global response during its tenure as president of the Council of the EU in partnership with bodies like the WHO. Kerry was talking about the importance of availability and access for new and existing antibiotics. Tell us about your work.
Well, first of all, I think you're really coming into this in a good way, because I'm the Swedish ambassador for antimicrobial resistance, for the work against antimicrobial resistance. But that is not, my remit is obviously not to fight AMR. I'm here to make sure that cancer patient, that patients around the world can continue to have access to treatment of infections. And sometimes we forget about that when we talk about AMR. So resistance is one of the threats to reliable access to treatment. But there are also many other hurdles and challenges when it comes to access to treatment, access to diagnostics. And this is, as you mentioned, the EU presidency, which is now already 2 years ago, or 1.5 anyway, we really try to connect the dots here when it comes to access, to assessing the needs, and to coming back to where we started, development of new antibiotics. I think in this room, we are here because we care about AMR. We all know that we're never going to overcome AMR. As long as we use antibiotics, we will have resistance developing, and we will always have to use antibiotics for certain infections. So we really try to visualize this in like a circle or chain of assessing the needs, monitoring the situation all the time, assessing the needs both for access to the existing antibiotics that are very often still effective, if we can get hold of them, but also the needs for development of new treatments, and again, according to the needs of the patients. And now we're here in the Health Summit, but I just want to add that, of course, we want also to be able to treat our animals, our food-producing animals and our dear pets. So that is also part of my remit, even though we're not focusing on that today. But the animal sector will obviously never have access to the new antimicrobials that we develop. So then it's even more important, I think, to assure the existing ones that they are both available and also still effective. So that's the work that we've been doing. And access, we know that around the world, access or failing access to antibiotics is still killing more people than resistant infections. But it's also something that I think we all can relate to, not the least during the COVID pandemic, but also before that. The entire world was suffering from stockouts of antibiotics, key essential antibiotics, sometimes really lengthy stockouts and very, very frequent. We also, in a small country like Sweden, we are also quite good at stewardship, so we're not overusing antibiotics so much. We're not a very interesting market. We see a lot of withdrawals from the market of existing and still very effective antibiotics, and that is especially when it comes to pediatric formulations, for example. So what we see now is that we have to hospitalize children because we don't have any oral antibiotics to send them home with. You can imagine what costs that come with, just because we don't have the antibiotics we had before for treating these children. So what we try to do during this the presidency to highlight and come together, bring the EU countries together to see what is possible apart from the R&D aspects, there is so much more we can do to increase access. We can talk about the regulatory aspects, including, of course, regulatory support for development of new antibiotics. We can talk about the procurement. There are, more and more models for pooled procurement, for example, but also the contracting itself. Why do we always reward the cheapest alternative? Why can't we assure that we can also reward delivery security, for example? We could have volume commitments, we could have longer contracts, and all this would improve the predictability for the manufacturers and improve the possibility to have reliable access.
So just to take that thought a little bit further then, because access is a crucial issue and access to new and novel antibiotics will be a crucial issue. So what do you think is the role of governments in supporting R&D in antibiotics and innovation?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that we have to pay for it. And we have to pay for, again, the possibility to treat, not the actual drug itself. So, and I was really glad when we started this conversation because, usually when we talk about R&D, we start with the financing. We say, no, it's not. It's not worth investing in antibiotics. We all know that it's a failing market model. But I'm really glad that we started with a real challenge, which is a scientific challenge, because we tend to forget that. But of course, yes, we also have to have the investment. We see now more and more initiatives for alternative ways of paying for innovation. In Sweden, we, being a small country, we have been still focused on access to antimicrobials, but we've been testing a partially delinked model for paying for access to antibiotics instead of paying for the actual drug itself. So that's a revenue guarantee model where we pay a certain amount regardless of how much we use. And that is absolutely possible to scale up also to incentivize development of new antibiotics. And we see these types of models. The most famous one is the British model, where the UK already implemented the same type of what we call a prescription model. But we also see this coming back in several, I think it's already 5 of the G7 declarations that we should work to promote incentive models for development of new antibiotics. And we see that both Canada and Japan are now working with their pilots. So this is, of course, a way to move forward. We don't have to have one global model. We can't go through a UN declaration to do this. But as long as we, again, coming back to predictability, as long as we can make sure that these criteria are similar enough, these different models, they don't have to be exactly the same. They could still be a strong incentive if it's predictable enough for the investors to make sure that you can have access to these this reimbursement. So I think this is the way forward for us, and within the EU, this is also an ongoing work, both with the revenue guarantee model that is being piloted, but also in the pharma legislation negotiations, where another type of model, a voucher for extended data protection, is also being discussed and negotiated.
That's great that you're talking about incentives, because that brings us neatly onto the next section of the conversation, where we are going to delve a little bit more into the political declaration and talk about how we can make some of the commitments that world leaders made at the General Assembly into reality. So I'm sure you all know this off by heart, but just as a reminder, world leaders pledged to reduce global deaths associated with AMR by 10% by 2030 through, among other things, boosting R&D for vaccines, diagnostics and antibiotics, driving multi-sectoral research and development through innovative incentives and financing mechanisms, strengthening public-private partnerships, integrating AMR research strategies into national action plans. I think we've mentioned national action plans, and undertaking measures to address the growing shortage of researchers and medical specialists. So my question to all of you panelists is how do we turn those commitments into reality? We've spoken a little bit with Marlene about financing and incentives. I know it's not all just about the money, but the money is always a crucial factor in the development of new products. So what are your thoughts on incentives and innovative mechanisms? What might that look like? Michael, what would be the view of industry?
So I would start off by agreeing that money is not everything, but in the story that I told around discovery and development, I think the point that I try to make is that it is essential. We don't discover, develop, deploy new antibiotics in a passive way. And I think part of the discussion that I hear in the broader ecosystem is, I think, consistent with how I think about it, is that we will pay for this one way or another. We will either pay for it up front by investing in innovation, investing in deployment, investing in infrastructure, investing in changing healthcare systems, or we will pay passively, and that is with morbidity and mortality and recovering those costs. So the point that was additionally made, I think, is that antibiotics create a unique model challenge that we need to acknowledge in that system, in that our intention at Roche from the discovery and development of new antibiotics is not that they are used at scale, but only that they are used appropriately. And in that context, that means limiting the utilization. And that is a challenge for how most business processes are set up, where volume-based pricing and that outcome drives the ability to reinvest that revenue back. So that's a particular challenge of this sector, where I think Malen's point around how do we pay for this is quite important.
This must be a key issue in LMICs. Under-resourcing is always a critical problem.
Yeah. So the concern we have in LMICs is the lack of domestic funding to invest in R&D. So if you look at the latest landmark report from the African Union, it's rather silent on R&D. It speaks about access, prevention, stewardship and surveillance, but not so much on the actual R&D, which is, I think, a lost opportunity or a missed opportunity, because we have a very strong traditional medicines culture and lots of really good areas of excellence, or people working in this area with lots of plant-based, for example, that have potential as antimicrobials. So I think that's a bit of a lost opportunity in terms of the R&D aspect of it. I mean, resources will always be a concern in low and middle income countries. And it's resources along the entire value chain of R&D, access, appropriate use because of the requirement in strengthening lab capacity, then also the disposal aspect of it and how do we dispose of them correctly. So
weren't these issues thought of during or after the pandemic, when it became clear that LMICs wanted to take a more active role in coming up with vaccines? Are there not lessons learned there that could apply here?
Yes, there are lessons learned. So there has been an increase. Yesterday we had a discussion around regional access to health technology assessments as well as medications and vaccines. And we are aware that there are 25 vaccine manufacturers in Africa. And that's hopefully going to be increasing the production, not only for Africa, but also globally. So these kinds of investments are really good in that. And then the Africa Medicines Agency is in collaboration with the PAHO to look at how they can learn from PAHO in terms of access and appropriate use and disposal in that area. So what's been spoken about is pool procurement and subscription, similar to what Marlene said. And maybe that's going to be the first low-hanging fruit that we can think about to make sure that there is accessibility to existing and new antimicrobials as they become available.
Anyone else have comments on incentivizing research and development in particular? Should we move on to public-private partnerships and collaboration? You've all spoken about the importance of collaboration. We have some excellent collaborative platforms. I'm sure many of you are present in the room today. But how do we foster effective partnerships to involve stakeholders, NGOs, industry, governments, academia? How do we foster that? Maybe you can talk about your role.
I think I would start, when we work in partnership, it's always going to be more difficult than if you do it just by yourself in, you know, finding really the common ground and getting the partnership going. But I think this investment is really worth it, and it is necessary. I mean, we've done this from the EU level in different configurations. I already did briefly mention our partnership with Africa. On the production side, I can briefly point out that we have the Team Europe initiative, where we invest quite significantly with partners in Africa to really increase the production of medicines and vaccines. That's going to continue. On the research, we have worked with, and are working with industry through what we call the Innovative Medicines Initiative at the time, and now it is changed into the Innovative Health Initiative. And I had the privilege of being able to contribute to the launch of what was called the Combacta program, which is really focusing on antimicrobial resistance. And this was a broad, and is still some activities ongoing, a broad range program, bringing really the industry, let's say, knowledge and acumen in, you know, driving these products and developments forward with the academic research and the activities of small and medium-sized enterprises. And this has really produced a lot of positive outcomes, including, you know, indeed, this work contributed to the approval of Emblaveo, one of the combination antibiotics that was approved by the European Commission earlier this year, and which is actually active against some of the resistant bacteria. So it demonstrates that through this partnership, we can really advance the pipeline, we can advance the individual products. Perhaps something, Michael mentioned it, what we can still do more about is really bring in this diagnostic aspect, because even in Europe and even in well-resourced hospitals, my understanding is that obviously there is an information lag and a challenge, and not forgetting that it's not that we really have quite a few resistance mechanisms. I mean, we know that in tuberculosis there is actually good resistance testing available, but for the more general antibiotic resistant that we encounter and cancer patients encounter and many others, this is really not a straightforward thing to do. And maybe I'm not totally up to date, but there's certainly a lot of work still to do to make this practical, and I think maybe some more thinking of public-private collaboration in this space, and really looking at the implementation side, because it's all nice and well if it works in the pilot project, but this has to be rolled out to practically every hospital in Europe and across the world, and that is what is still very challenging with the time lags, with the lack of electronic systems and so on. So there is a lot of work to do on that front.
Thank you. Kerry?
Yeah, I think sometimes we get hung up with the word innovation, being it's a responsibility of Roche, okay, and or others. I don't want to be biased. I include all pharma companies in that list. The truth is, we need innovation in the way that we think about how we make medicines available around the world, and this is creating what we've called new business ecosystems that work for all. Because the truth is, if you look at cancer, we have lots of medicines which are on the essential medicines for WHO, which are not available in low middle-income countries. And there are lots of good reasons why that's not happening. It's registration's complicated, support locally is complicated, there aren't any diagnostics and pathology there, there's no trained oncologists, it goes on and on and on. And therefore, there are a series of barriers which prevent common 20-year-old medicines getting into countries that need them for pretty basic cancers. So within UICC, and this is why I want to talk about the stakeholders and bringing partners together, we've established an ATOM coalition, Access to Oncology Medicines Coalition, 46 organisations, including now Roche and Pfizer and AstraZeneca, loads of NGOs, Direct Relief, Project ECHO, and the American Society of Clinical Pathology, because we've recognised that actually getting medicines from a warehouse in the USA to people who need it in LMICs is quite a complicated and complex challenge that needs multiple skill sets and multiple organisations to become involved. Because the traditional way of solving that that problem is one indication like breast cancer, donation of a medicine to a few countries through an NGO, and that is the way that we've resolved some of those challenges in the past. But donation models, are a bit awkward and difficult, and we don't want to do them longer term. So we need to develop new business ecosystems. Now, I remember talking to someone some years ago who said that to every complex problem, there's a simple answer proposed by an idiot, okay? This needs a complex solution. So we've brought together the complexity of the organizations, and we're now establishing new pathways for companies to get their medicines into those countries at lower risk, at a lower price, okay, to the people who need it, with partners working on the component parts that need to be in place in order for that medicine to be used by the right patient at the right time. And we've built that over the last 2.5 years. Now, I'd give that as an example of where I think innovation needs to be extended beyond the great work that you're doing to saying, how do we collectively, as stakeholders in this problem, find ways to work differently to create new business ecosystems that benefit all? And that includes the government, it includes the companies, it includes the third parties in between, and it also includes, most importantly, the patients. So I think innovation itself demands complexity, and it demands stakeholder and shareholders working together.
Can I make a comment on
Sure.
this also? So I agree completely with Carrie's comment and the UICC's position on this as the innovation across the whole system. I did want to speak a bit about the value of public-private partnerships, first from the industrial perspective, but then a little bit from something that we're missing today, which is the biotechnology, the small biotech space. So first of all, around the industrial experience with public-private partnership, this is really essential for one of the points that I raised around talent and expertise. So I would highlight as an example a relationship that we have with the U.S. government with BARDA, which is cooperates with Roche in the development of innovative antibiotics. In this context, we have the Roche experts as an internal team, but there are also seasoned experts in antimicrobial R&D that sit on the BARDA side, and we communicate together. So it's not Roche receives money and works in isolation to do what we think. It is actually a collaborative experience where a group of stakeholders think together on how to solve the problem. And the second piece I want to highlight is what we've talked about today are the Rushes and the Pfizers of the world, but the biotechnology space is one of the most important foundations of innovation in this space. And one of the major gaps we haven't talked about is how do you get funding into biotech space? And the traditional approach of investor-backed approaches simply does not work in this space because the expected return on investment is absent. The exit strategies, the final outcome of being able to deliver those medicines that were developed in a biotechnology space, that avenue is not there. And organizations like, I'll highlight Carbex, have been absolutely essential at maintaining and building investment in the biotechnology space.
Marlon.
Yeah. Now, I very much agree, and I want to come back to the public-private partnership. We talk a lot about it. We know how it can be shaped. But a few important aspects around that. Obviously, we have to think about already stewardship and access when we start this up. And there are in many of these models also a requirement for stewardship and access plan, for example. But I mean, they have to be not just a paper, but a true intention to make sure this is happening. But I want to come back to what Michael said earlier today, which is the investment in the scientists, in the young scientists, and I mean the entire also workforce. We need to not just invest in them, but also attract them. This should be something, interesting to work with, and I think it is. It is intriguing. It's really, it's a thrill to work with the challenge of bacteria that are no longer so easy to find new treatments for. So that is what I would like to see also.
Well, that's one of the challenges, though,
yeah.
isn't it? Building scientific talent, particularly in countries where they're hemorrhaging their talent. How do you keep that? How do you nurture that? How do you expand that?
I would like to see that also in all the public-private partnerships building up, to have this aspect reflected and really make sure that that is a component of these collaborations. I think that would be wonderful.
Brilliant.
and truly important.
I'm going to take a pause there and see if there are any questions from the audience. We do have microphones which will reach you unless you are unusually good at projecting across a crowded room. Does anyone have any questions or comments or observations? Okay, so lady in the third row there. If you put your hand up so the gentleman can... There you go.
Thank you so much. Hello everyone, this is Purvi from International Pharmaceutical Students Federation. So I have a question to the panel that unlike ADR reportings, AMR reporting is lacking behind, I see, like in individual hospitals and other healthcare systems. So us youth being the anchor for the younger and the older generations, what are your views on involvement of youth in increasing the AMR surveillance and reporting, and also increasing the global cooperation? Thank you.
Well, you're the future, and we are putting all our hopes on you to solve our problems. What would the panel like to say? Go ahead, Sevilla.
So nice to see a pharmacist, fellow pharmacist in the room. I think that being a health scientist and being the dean for a while, the idea is to make sure that we teach the right things to our students. So if we think about the prescribers and the medical students and then the dispensers and the pharmacy students, then we need to ensure that these people know, the new healthcare professionals are aware of the fact that don't necessarily prescribe unless you're absolutely sure that that is the antimicrobial, first of all, that is indicated, and secondly, it's the right one. So the prescriber can monitor the dispenser and the dispenser the prescriber, and so we can take it from there. Just to say that in low and middle income countries, there are many different kinds of authorized prescribers. It's not just the physician, it's also the pharmacist and the nurse in certain areas. So this has to be a collaborative effort that allows us to do that. And it also requires the lab people, the prescribers, the dispensers, and more importantly, the nursing staff that do the actual administration, because it's really important that if you say 8 hours and it's a time-dependent antimicrobial, then that person is taught to make sure that you keep to time, even if it's not within your allocated time to make the rounds with medication.
Is that kind of data being adequately disseminated? Is everyone getting the right information?
So I think that I can speak from the regional perspective in Africa and from the South African perspective. So we as the International Federation of Pharmacists drew up antimicrobial roadmaps for regions. And one of the key things in almost all of the roadmaps was the education and training of all healthcare professionals involved in antimicrobial space.
Got you. Thank you. Thank you, Sabir. Another question. Gentleman there, fourth row.
Thank you.
Just 1 second, sir.
Thank you very much. I am Michel Ruyanzev from France, in Lyon. I speak for some company, mainly French, but one is from Switzerland, and we are proposing an innovative, as you call.
Can you hold the microphone to your mouth, sir?
Okay.
Because we can't hear you.
Innovation in AMR. Okay. Let me see what I want to say. Okay. In France, we have a very important old rules given by Claude Bernard and Louis Pasteur, c'est il vaut beaucoup mieux prévenir que guérir. Means it's better to prevent than to treat.
Right.
Okay. So we wanted to organize. We propose new bacterial vaccine. We think that it's better to
So not treat the infection, you prevent the infection in the first place. Well, I mean, that would be the holy grail. And I'm sure everyone would say that was a key goal.
And in the case of pneumococcus, I mean, there is effective vaccines, and indeed this is important. But I think from the vaccine development side, I mean, we have talked about the challenges of antibacterial medicines development. The vaccine development is quite challenging also. So, but clearly, and in the different research efforts that both us and other funders are supporting, vaccines are clearly on the roadmap. And depending on the infection, that can be a super important tool because, as you said, it's better to prevent than to treat. And then we can reduce the use of antibiotics, even with vaccines, we do see resistance developing, so we have to, again, adapt the vaccine. So it is really an ecological arms race, if we may call it that, of which...
I like that, biological arms race.
Or ecological.
Or ecological arms race,
this goes back really to the ecological niche within which the bacteria have lived for billions of years and where we are kind of scratching on the surface of that. And but yeah, vaccines are super important.
Thank you.
Just to conclude, we wanted to prepare a working group for bacterial vaccine, and now discovering this beautiful hub, we like to be member of the hub.
I'm sure the hub will speak to you, I can see Leslie nodding. I will send her your way after this session. Thank you very much. Thank you. Kerry, you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, just on the issue of prevention, I agree with you entirely. In fact, that's a sort of a mantra for the cancer community. That's prevent cancer, reduce tobacco, address obesity, all those things, get vaccinations out to avoid cervical cancer, for example. However, we had a meeting during the UNGA in New York, we got the cancer community that were there together with us, including Marlin, to discuss about what are the practical things that we can actually do as a result of this political declaration within the cancer community. And we had a colleague there from ASCO, and ASCO mentioned that they have in the past worked with various groups in America to develop guidelines for oncologists around the world with regard to specific issues. And they said they didn't think there was a guideline in place on preventing and managing infections in immunocompromised cancer patients. And so our colleagues at ASCO are going to be reaching out to their opposite numbers who deal with the infection space to see if we can get some consolidated guidelines that we can then share globally to inform the oncologists around the world about how to prevent and also manage infections going forward. So I really believe in practical things that we can do, and I agree entirely. If we can prevent, then of course that makes life a little bit easier for those who are going through their treatment of cancer and also other diseases.
Kerry, thank you. Another question from the floor. I saw a hand go up at the back there. The lady standing, yes. Thank you.
Hello, I am Rahaf, a Syrian pharmacist living and working in Portugal. So I have a comment and a question. A sad fact that in some countries accessing antibiotics is as easy as, if not easier than accessing candies. And unfortunately, in my country, amoxicillin is called cold medication, which is very, very sad. So I would like to ask, what are the global efforts to increase and improve the patient education, especially in low-income countries where AMR is not a priority? Thank you.
I'm astonished that you can still get antibiotics over the counter like that. Thank you very much indeed for that question. Yes, AMR literacy, Sabia.
So just to say that all countries have a regulation that says you're not allowed to dispense an antimicrobial or purchase an antimicrobial without a prescription, but the enforcement capacity in countries is really lacking. So the first thing is on a regulatory space to ensure that we have the enforcement capacity to ensure that antimicrobials are not dispensed over the counter. And in the political declaration, and I don't know which chapter it is, but there's an explicit reference to it in terms of making sure that there are interventions put into place to do that. In terms of awareness and education, again, there's an entire division within the World Health Organization and certainly other quadripartite organizations that speak to increasing awareness and that. But what becomes really important in this conversation is health literacy. How you communicate the importance of AMR, which is quite an intangible aspect, to civil society is very different from how you would communicate it to a healthcare professional or a policymaker. So it's really packaging the message in a way that will appeal and apply and be sort of understood by the person that you're trying to make the message to. So health literacy, communication, and all of that becomes really important. So we need to put a lot of effort into what we want to say, how we want to say it, and to whom we want to say it, and actually package that messaging accordingly. Thanks.
Marlin, this is one of your briefs, isn't it? Trying to expand an AMR-educated workforce.
Absolutely, and I think, and this is such a good example that we are working together, for example, the cancer community, that we can work with the student organizations. But I would also like to highlight that what you are saying about educating the community, it's the same with the highest political decision level. They also need to be educated. Yes, we were standing in New York 2 weeks ago and saying, everybody's saying this is really important, we need to do all this. But, I mean, during negotiations of this political declaration, it was also quite obvious that this is not something that everybody is very well aware of. They don't see, they hear about AMR, they say, yes, it's very important, we need to do more. But to really allocate the resources needed and to understand, especially to understand that this concerns me, we're absolutely not there yet. So yes, we have much more to do to make sure that we get real, tangible action.
And just one more sentence. From the behavioral economists, we know that giving agency to people, this is what can drive change. And so perhaps we need to invest a little more in thinking on what is it where we can give agency to the prescribers, to the public, that they take decisions, informed decisions that then really make a difference.
Thank you. Got time for one more question from the floor. Gentleman, second row.
Hello, Ben Sims from the Tropical Health and Education Trust. It's a curiously, isn't it, Eurocentric panel. You're all brilliant and it's been fantastic. I wonder if we had more representation from other parts of the world, including low middle income countries, there would be a greater focus on the practicalities, particularly around health workforce. So, Sabia, you did mention the Malawi example. But could you talk more, please, about the health workforce dimension of the AMR challenge? It'd be great to hear that.
Sure. It's a great point. Well, I'll let you kick off, Sabir, because I know others might come in on that. But expanding the workforce and are you talking just about the medical practitioners or R&D aspect as well?
We're talking about everything, pharmacists, including who aren't regulated.
So the whole AMR ecosystem, practitioners, experts, researchers, which takes a lot of investment, I know.
Yeah. So from an LMIC perspective, I think I spoke about the roadmaps and the curriculum issues around the African region and other regions as well. So when we think about education and awareness, that's one of the pillars of the Global Action Plan. And the WHO, for example, has created a competency framework and a curriculum for doctors, pharmacists, nurses, and I think lab technicians, if I'm not mistaken. It then, because health professional education is so regulated by health professional organizations and the issues around scopes of practice, etc., it's the responsibility of these regulatory bodies as well as the professional associations to ensure that the AMR, the actual entire curriculum of the healthcare professionals actually also include AMR, antimicrobial stewardship, etc. So we in South Africa, for example, are doing this across all our universities and making sure that we have learn from best practice and include that in there as well. But it's also training the already people that have been in practice for many, many years where AMR was not necessarily an issue when they graduated or when they've been practicing. And it's also then training and bringing the older, I'm sorry, I don't mean that as an ageist, but the older healthcare professionals up to speed in terms of their their practices and how they need to change to ensure that we sustain the efficacy of antimicrobials for generations to come. Just to say, in LMICs, the number of healthcare professionals to the number of population is very, very skewed. We don't have enough. And we do not have the luxury of dedicating a pharmacist that's only going to do stewardship or a medical doctor that's only going to do stewardship. It's going to be part of their workload. And we rely on champions and advocates and passionate people to do that. And maybe we need to rethink that and make sure that we have dedicated people to do this, who will then ensure that they bring everybody else on board and be able to work on it as well. So we have particular challenges. We rely on the goodwill of lots of healthcare professionals, but we need to rethink about how we work with the health workforce in this area.
Michael, are you able to give a very quick comment? I know you commented about how to retain scientific talent and researchers in R&D. Is there something we need to look at that is pertinent to low-income countries to help them build their scientific talent?
It's pertinent everywhere, right? So this is, I think, Sabia has talked about across really the broader value chain. When you think about scientists, researchers, and physicians who are doing R&D aspects, the need for talent is agnostic to borders, and the nature of the challenge of the problem is. I can't underestimate how substantial that is, and I think that there's a combination of factors of skill, but also desire, right? And there's no substitute for people who have had lived experience and understand the nature of the problem, rather than it being an abstraction. My own personal decision to move into pharmaceutical R&D came directly from caring for patients who had highly drug-resistant infections, and I would encourage anyone who has this experience, no matter where you are, that this is a great space to be working.
Brilliant. Now, look, we're in the closing moments. I'm so sorry. I have been warned that I cannot go over the time, and I just want to give our speakers all one last opportunity to give us their final thought, their call to action, if you like, on what is the one thing from your perspectives that need to be put in place to ensure a successful implementation of the commitments in the AMR declaration. Marlin, let us start with you.
Okay, let me start with something we didn't mention yet today, and that is very much connected with the political declaration: accountability. We made all these commitments and agreements now, and we must make sure that decision makers are also held accountable, and that is a very important task for civil society, obviously, but also all other stakeholders, including ourselves as governments. So there is a we talk about both national and global accountability, and there are paragraphs in this declaration that really preparing the way towards also more global accountability. Independent assessment of progress is what we need.
Thank you. Thank you, Marlin. Kerry.
I was fortunate to be at the UNGA, listening to all the member states' contributions, interventions as they went through the political declaration sign-off. And if you had just landed from Mars and you listened to that, you didn't think there was a problem. You really didn't.
Wow.
So, is that fair enough?
Yes.
Yes, it is. So I think the one thing that we've got to do, whether we're civil society or whether we're anyone, is to ensure that governments take those commitments seriously. And we've got to follow up at a national level to ensure that every government has read the outcomes document, not just the guy who supports the health minister. Everyone has read that document, and they understand the obligations they have as a country to take this issue seriously in the next 10, 20, 30 years. So that would be the one thing I'd say we need to do.
Kerry, thank you.
May I say two things, please?
If you're quick.
So the political declaration speaks about targets, accountability, as well as financial arrangements. So the one thing I'd like to speak about in terms of the implementation is for countries to determine, take a considered and evidence-informed way of determining what targets they can realistically, but also ambitiously respond to, and also to think about leveraging domestic funding from AMR-aligned programs that are already in place to be able to fund the AMR commitment as well. And finally, I'd like to ask for a call for equity, solidarity, and social justice across the innovation value chain. Thank you.
Sabia, thank you. Elmar.
Yeah. To get there, I think we need to really look at how we collaborate in this difficult space, and be open to new types of collaboration, sustain the ones we already have, because I think, again, certainly that is the way we approach this through our One Health AMR partnership, but also in other ways, and I think that can certainly help to get us where we need to be.
Thank you. And Michael, final thought from you.
I thought I really appreciate the opportunity to sit amongst such expertise in policy, and I am not that expert. I'm here from the perspective of how do we think about the molecules, how do we think about evidence generation, how do we think about clinical trials, and what I'm very happy about this opportunity to be able to think about the conversation where I hear it as financial over again, to then translate that back into say, why is that so? And the reality of the nature of the scientific problem that we're trying to achieve as one component of the battle against AMR. And I would leave with my last call to action that young scientists love hard problems, and this is a hard problem. So my last encouragement really to keep young scientists engaged on this problem.
Yeah, excellent thoughts. Panelists, thank you very much indeed for all your thoughts there. Yeah. It's been a pleasure speaking with you all and getting some sort of, absolute clarity on what needs to happen. So we're coming to the end of this session, but I am delighted first that we can hear some comments from the Chief Executive Officer of the Public Health Authority in Saudi Arabia on the steps being taken there to combat AMR. Please welcome Dr. Abdullah Al-Ghazani.
So thank you very much, Global R&D Hub, for the invitation. Thank you for Roche for the invitation, and cold morning but warm welcomes, and being with a colleague and friends. Thank you for great esteemed panelists for the great speeches and insight about the AMR. AMR is an existential threat to the modern medicine that we are enjoying. Standard procedure that it is being always taken as a granted might be no longer feasible in the future. I am an infectious disease specialist. I witnessed cancer patient who survived a deadly cancer and then they died from antimicrobial resistance. Patient who waited long time for organ, and once they got the organ, they died from antimicrobial resistance. And patients who waited for surgery for knee transplant, and they end up by having amputated knee or something. So this existential threat has been hardly put in the political agenda, and that's why in Saudi Arabia we took AMR as a serious matter since 2016. We adopted the National Action Plan, and we supported the G20 notion and AMR as a political agenda. During Saudi Arabia presidency 2020, we put AMR as a priority in our agenda, and we took it in our declaration. And also, we hosted a series of side events, organized events in World Health Assembly and also in UN General Assembly to tackle and to discuss AMR and bringing the AMR in the political agenda, and also to be making sure that we are on the higher priorities. So we are hosting the high-level ministerial meeting in 2024, this November, weeks away. And we are announcing a series of concrete action to tackle AMR. One of them actually is the Learning Hub. The Learning Hub is actually touching one of the important thing about the knowledge sharing and understanding the magnitude and how we implement the National Action Plan. It's fascinating to me how the knowledge gap that it's been in the field of AMR. One of my colleagues, for example, is a very famous surgeon. He talked to me and he said, bring us something. I'm sure that your ID hiding some antibiotic here and there. But I said, as you mentioned, there is nothing. It has to stay in IV antibiotic for the hospital. So the myriad of ignorance in such problem need to be highlighted, and that's why the Knowledge Hub is coming the action. And also we are announcing the logistic hub as well to facilitate a new innovative way of assuring supply to essential antibiotic. hope to see you all in 2024 in November. And again, thank you for the invitation and thank you for having me here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Al-Ghazani. Thank you once again to our speakers. There are further discussions today on antimicrobial resistance, the next one hosted by our colleagues at the IFPMA and CARB-X. That's at 2 p.m. in Europe room, I believe. So I hope to see you there. It's time to take a quick break, but first let's give all our speakers and Leslie Ogilvie as well from Global AMR R&D Hub one last round of applause.